George Orwell was born Eric Blair in India in 1903, and he was the son of a minor colonial official. He was educated at Eton, so he went back to England. He studied in England and he attended Eton, where he started to express his rebellious ideas immediately. He was against the values imposed in the English schools: punishments, competition, discipline, development of character, the moral code. He began to develop an independent-minded personality, an indifference to accepted values, and professed atheism and socialism since the times of Eton. When he left the college, he started to work for the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, that is now Myanmar. But this experience as a servant for the British Empire was completely negative to him, as we can imagine, because of his values, because of his independent-minded personality, because of his opposition to every form of man's dominion over another man. And in his work, Burmese Days, that was published in 1934, he described his experience there, the atrocities, the brutality, the injustice, and the abuses perpetrated by the British Empire against other people, against other populations. He opposed strongly the idea of the British superiority, of the white man's burden that had been at the basis of the development of the great British Empire. So he gave up, he left this job because it was completely contrary to his values. And once back in London, he devoted himself to writing full-time. Actually, he started a social experiment that was very similar to Robert Louis Stevenson's. If you remember, he had decided to live as a bohemian in the old town of Edinburgh. And a similar experience was done by George Orwell. He spent short periods living in common lodging houses in the East End of London, seeking the company of the down and outs. The down and outs are the poor, the most destitute social classes. In this way, he directly experienced the poverty and learned how institutions for the poor, such as hostels, prisons, lodging houses, and hospitals, worked. And as Robert Louis Stevenson, he lived a conflict between his social background, is coming from the middle class, and his emotional identification, his empathy with the working class. Also, in common with the Robert Louis Stevenson, there was also the poor health. They both, Robert Louis Stevenson and George Orwell, suffered from bronchial troubles, and so suffered from tuberculosis, and both of them died for this reason. Well, after his experience in the East End of London, he also attended a similar experience in Paris, where he worked as a dishwasher in a hotel. It was in this period that he started to work to write his works with the pseudonym of George Orwell, and he published a report of his experience among the down and outs in his work Down and Out in Paris and London, that was published in 1933. Well, George Orwell felt a lot the social commitment of a writer. And in fact, in his essay Inside the Whale, he tried to define the difference between the writers of the 1920s and the writers of the 1930s. The first group that, of course, included Joyce and Virginia Woolf, had been much more interested in creating a language, a technique, in creating shaping literary techniques that could express a tragic post-war pessimism, while, in his opinion, the writers of the 30s had felt much more the social commitment. But a writer too should be independent, according to Orwell, because no good writing could come from following a party line. And so he strongly felt his social and political commitment as a writer, but anyway, he was socially and politically involved all life long. In fact, he decided to live very strong experiences. So the first one was the one for the, the report of his job in the Indian Imperial Police. The second experience was the one with the Down and Out in Paris and London, and as he felt this social function of the writer, he reported this experience in a work. And also he was commissioned by a left-wing publisher to investigate conditions among the miners, factory workers and unemployed in the industrial north, where he stayed for 2 months. The result was The Road to Wigan Pier, that was published in 1937. Another important experience was the one that he lived when he went to fight for the Spanish Civil War between between 1936 and 1939. He joined the militia of the workers, part of Marxist unification, and fought in the trenches of the Aragon Front. In the homage to Catalonia that he published in 1938, he recalled this experience as a strong time and as the time of his true conversion to socialism and the ideals of brotherhood and equality. When the Second War started, he joined the BBC broadcasting cultural and political programs to India. It was also the period when he started to write Animal Farm, that was, along with 1984, his most important novel. And in 1943 he resigned and became the literary editor of the Tribune, an influential socialist weekly. And he died of tuberculosis in 1950, as I have already mentioned. So this is a summary of his works I have already mentioned. And Animal Farm, I have given you a lot of information about the social and political background of this novel in the 2 slides that I have uploaded on Classroom. And in particular, Animal Farm was in fact written some years before the year when it was published, that is 1945. That is because it was very difficult for him to find an editor for this novel, as it was a criticism of totalitarianism, but referred openly to Stalin, and Stalin and Russia were crucial allies of England during the Second World War. So it was only at the end of the Second World War that he managed to publish this novel. And finally, the most important novel was 1984, that is Dystopia, a dystopian novel that is, he shows in this novel a possible future society that isn't ideal at all, and that satirizes existing conditions of society. So starting from the existing conditions of society, he conceives this dystopic novel. So it was very important for Orwell, the fact that he lived all these social and political experiences abroad, and that gave him the ability to see his country from the outside, to see English, to judge England as for its strengths and its weaknesses. Dickens got inspiration for his work, especially for his novels, from Daniel Defoe and Jonathan Swift, in particular the dystopian novel by Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. But he was also indebted to Charles Dickens as for the choice of social themes, the realistic language, and the focus on the misery caused by poverty and deprivation. He insisted on the tolerance, justice, and decency in human relationships, and above all, he criticized all kinds of totalitarianisms, every kind of violation of liberty and tyranny in all its forms, so helping his readers to recognize tyranny in all its forms.